Today's guest is part of a husband and wife team that walks the line between one at a time custom quality wooden lures and large scale production quality and consistency. The company has been a fixture at surf casting shows since 2010. Most of the lure designs were handed off by Al Gagg and have been around some since the late 1980s. Recently, the company redesigned a number of their lures to be configured with a flag on the back. The data from a recent study has proven that these lures configured in this way will reduce the post-release mortality for striped bass. All the lures are sealed, painted, epoxied, rigged, and packaged in small batches at their workshop in Berlin, Connecticut. Please welcome Elliot Thomas of 24/7 Lures to the Saltwater Edge Podcast. How are we doing, man?
Oh, I'm great. Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be on the podcast.
I appreciate that. That's a great backdrop. That is what a booth at a show might look like, right?
Yeah, I try to maintain quite a bit of inventory so that, guys like you can have product when they need. But it's a can of worms. You got to have a little of this and a little of that, and
Right.
before you know it, you end up with a wall.
Well, what delayed me for getting on the phone with you this morning was we were doing basically that, our inventory meeting. We have four guys. I do apparel and, stuff like Sims and waders and corkers, and Kobe does fly and Eric does rods and reel. And it's all a juggling act because, you don't want to run out and you want to have what they want when they want it. And I'm sure there's some seasonality. I'm hoping we'll get into about lure selection and demand, probably a little bit related to the bait.
Yeah, there certainly is some seasonality and some patterns, but I haven't figured them out yet. That's for sure.
That's why I got four guys trying to help me now, right? Because I clearly haven't in 31 years. So let's start off with the how your company came to be. I know it was a previously existing concern that you. What's the dog's name?
Oh, this is Minnie. I didn't know you could see her on the camera, but
Hey, Minnie, welcome.
she's a shop dog, but she's also an intention, defrayed little
Yes.
thing.
Yeah,
Can you
we have a double dog Tuesday here. Typically, we have two dogs, and maybe so it's great to have them around. Anyway, the the way the company kind of came to be, I know it existed before you had it, and I know some
Yep.
of the legacy products came from Al Gagg's. And so why don't you do the little history how you got to here?
Well, if you ask Al, who actually Al says hi, he called
Hmm.
just before we got on the phone and he wanted to say hi, but I have a policy not to ignore his phone calls. Um, But if you ask Al and you ask Jeff, you get two different answers. So I figure the truth is probably somewhere in between the two.
Sure.
But back in the day, Al Gagg was making wooden lures, which the guys who are watching the video can see stuff like
Sure.
this. The needlefish goes back to the mid 80s, but he had needlefish, bottleneck swimmers, metal lips. He had a bunch of different stuff. And I think when his soft plastics started to pick up, he was looking for someone to take over the wooden lures.
Yeah.
He also sold off the Gags grabbers, hard plastic, to
That's an
another
item
guy.
I've been chasing forever.
Yeah,
That's a good
all of
one.
us have.
Yeah.
But Jeff, a friend of mine, Jeff Dunbar, took over the wooden lures,
Hmm.
and this brand from Al Gags became 24/7.
Got it.
And that was somewhere around 2009, 2010. Again, I get different answers depending on who I ask, but somewhere around 2015, 2016, I think Jeff was looking to get out on the water more. He was
Hmm.
tired of spending too much time in his workshop. He needed to make some changes and get the workshop out of his house. So it sort of fell into my lap. Um, I've been a fisherman my whole life, but never building on this kind of a capacity.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I had a big love for 24/7 because I used those lures before. I actually won a tournament where I submitted a few fish caught on 24/7 lures.
Awesome. Hmm.
And at the time, Jeff had met with a handful of guys, captains that we know, other guys in the industry. And, one guy backed out because he didn't want to paint, and another guy backed out because he didn't want to pour lead. So it sort of fell into my lap. I
Hmm.
adopted the business from Jeff, and it's been officially mine. Um, Might be next week or 2 weeks from now. It's been officially mine for 8 years.
Oh, wow.
So I've had it since the first quarter of 2017, and grown it as much as I can from a nighttime and weekend business. Now it's my full-time thing.
Yeah, I know. In setting this up, you're like, yeah, I'm good between. I think it was like 9 and 3, right? Due to kid at school, and when he gets off the bus,
Yep.
that's yeah, what a great kind of way to work at home, be
Yeah,
creative.
I mean,
You
I'm
know,
very lucky. I'm definitely not the breadwinner. You're not going to get rich building fishing lures. You probably don't get rich in the fishing industry any which way,
right?
but you know,
Fact.
my my wife is the breadwinner, and I'm very lucky that I get to take care of the kids in the morning, get my son on the bus, get my son off the bus, and it's a very flexible and manageable job.
Yeah, it does require weekends because you're pretty much a staple at the shows,
I ebb and flow with my wife and her schedule in those shows. I can't do them all. There's
right?
no way I can leave my wife home alone with two kids and a dog
Yeah.
for all the shows. I have to turn some of them down, but she's very accommodating and very forgiving, and she lets me do quite a few of them.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I think it's one of the things that I know we do this big plug show and you're a part of it, and um, it's really something. The creativity, the some of the meticulous paint, and and I realized when I first got involved with the Saltwater Edge almost 30 years ago that all fishermen, whether it's surf casters, boat guys, fly guys, whatever. Um, this is a passion, and you can really have opinions about the color of that bucktail. Is that sandeel olive or silverside olive, or is that lip, angled properly or not? Or, I'm not a fan of those split rings, whatever. I mean, it goes. There's so many rat holes in this game. It's ridiculous. So you took over a handful of lures from Al, and you've added some, I imagine. So in the chronology of things, I think your products group into maybe needlefish, sort of spooks, and pencils mostly. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And so I want to talk a little bit about your sense of application. I think you might even have 5 different needlefish, right? So maybe a little bit talking about application to try to tie this out a bit between tackle and tactics. You spend enough time on the water, and your other guys and other the guys who buy from you do. Um, what are some of the why have 5 needlefish? What are some of the distinctive? Less about the 24/7 aspect as the application, if you will, but
Sure.
yeah.
Um, well, the story I tell it shows when somebody asks me about needlefish. I believe if you're not fishing either needlefish or darters, you're
Hmm.
missing out on fish
Hmm.
because needlefish, and I'm going to lump in darters, but needlefish do something that no other lure does, and it sneaks through through a spot. It sneaks through a boulder field.
Hmm.
Um, Jerry Audette is really one who pushes this concept. A bait fish isn't out there in the water screaming, "Eat me, eat me."
Yeah, trying to hide in plain sight. That's
Right.
Jerry's words. Yeah.
Yeah. So a needlefish, and again, I sort of think a darter, but a needlefish does that better than anything. And, we say the word needlefish because that's what we call this lure, but I don't think of needlefish, the bait fish. I
Okay.
think of sea bass and squid and sand eels, and I think the needlefish lure impersonates that.
Hmm.
So whether it's a slow sink needlefish like the ones I make, or a faster sink like the ones from Super Strike, a needlefish in general does something very well, and that's present a natural profile in the water. So why have 5? Because they all do something a little bit different.
Sure.
And
I think of the as you say about profile in the water. I think there's also, having just come from a Newport Saltwater Fishing Club meeting last night. Dennis Zimbrata's been the president of that forever. Big needlefish guy, and always preaching. If you think you're doing it slow, go slower. So you've got the combination of profile, suggestion of life, not screaming "hey hey," and subtle, which is a hide in plain sight move. Basically, you don't race around, you
right.
glide.
But the needlefish has the ability to do all of from one end of the spectrum to the other.
Yeah.
You can crawl it through a boulder field, or you can skip it on the surface, or you can mix it up.
Yeah.
I generally find my success is somewhere in between the two, going slow and then giving it a burst of speed now and again.
Mhm.
Because I try and envision if I were a bait fish in the water and I saw a striper behind me, I'm gonna try and get away.
Yeah.
Um, you
Well,
know,
it's
the analogy that I make to especially young guys at shows is if you're in a room of 100 or 500 or 1,000 people, I sort of picture like the Providence Rissa show where there's people everywhere. And there's somebody in that room that you either owe money to or has a big grudge, he's looking to kick your butt. You're not going to put on a big show. You're going to sneak around. You're going to
yeah.
try and get out of that place as quietly as possible. So as much as I love fishing metal lips, they're sort of the opposite end of the spectrum for me.
Yeah.
To me, a metal lip is saying like, here I am, eat me, and a needlefish is sneaking through quietly, trying to get out of there.
That's a great way to say it because I'm making notes for myself. Because I think of John Skinner and how he says you can fish with plugs for, you know, 4 hours, put on an eel and hook up, promptly thereafter, and a lot of his experience over time, right? And the one of the reasons I believe is if it's an eel and there's a striper behind it in the dark, we're out there in the dark on a rock, right? So we don't get any visual feedback, right? Um, if there's, I mean, maybe you see a swirl, but I mean, stick with me here. It's out there and you don't get a lot of visual feedback. An eel's going to react to the presence of the predator. The SP minnow, whatever you want to throw is not, we don't even know, right? So it doesn't get that escape,
Right.
and I know from, fly fishing steelhead experience and my lure experience that sometimes when you have a sweep of current in the lure fly sweeps, and then as it gets down current of you, it speeds up and rises. That's as it comes under tension. But those are two escape triggers.
Right.
Like, and that's often where you get whacked. So or you talk about fish hit on the drop and things like that. So they're all responses by the predator. But the premise of the needlefish is to like hide in plain sight, which is an interesting, like you say, slip out of the Risa show without that guy real money fighting.
Right.
Yeah.
I could use different analogies, but that's probably the most appropriate for a large audience.
Yeah.
I think the same thing about soft plastics, like the gravity tackle GT eel. That presents so naturally in the water. Paddle tails are great. Sure, paddle tails have their purpose, but a GT eel or Algag's twitch it eel, they sort of sneak through. And a needlefish is the closest I can get to that soft plastic presentation out of wood or plastic for that matter.
You do have another fan favorite of mine, which is that rocket, I guess, with the Gag's tail.
Yeah.
So
which is why I say
didn't mash it up.
which is why I say 5 or 6 needlefish, depending on how you count them.
Yeah, show people. To me, I think it's a great kind of searching lure and everything else.
Yeah, the pocket rocket is something that Al Gaggs started years ago.
Right.
Originally, it had a marabou and feather tail on the back before the soft plastics were a thing. But it was a little wooden body, sort of like a miniature needlefish with a feathery tail. This is one of the first things I reach for if there's fish blitzing, because it's just got a single hook. It's a tiny little package. I can cast it extremely well on any rod. And also, if you're trying to unhook fish, especially small fish, quickly, it's real easy to grab that without worrying about getting hooked. Whereas even fishing a needlefish with just one hook on them, you sort of need to navigate around there without getting a treble hook in the hand. And There are a few things that give me the EBGBs, like getting a hook in the hand. It just creeps me out. It sends shivers down my spine.
I don't even like talking about it.
Right, exactly. I get pictures once in a while from customers that it's just shivers down my spine. I don't know how else
Yeah.
to describe it.
Well, the needlefish, pretty universal, and I totally agree with your logic there of gliding and sliding like a sluggo, like a gravity tackle, and there's a spot for that. Why did you group the darter with the needlefish?
Because I think a darter can be fished in the same similar way where it's a natural presentation. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's a little bit noisier than a needlefish. It's going to put
Yeah,
off a little bit bigger profile,
yeah,
but it
vibration.
has more of a natural swim to it,
Yeah,
as opposed to a metal lip swimmer or a bottle darter or, um, even an SP minnow is like the perfect example where they just throw off a lot of vibration. A darter vibrates and swims, but I think it swims more elegantly than some of those other lures.
to geek out a little bit, um, I did a podcast a week or two ago with this guy, Aaron Adams. He's the Bonefish Tarpon Trust science guy, and he looks at, as from a scientist background, looks at habitat, then what lives there, then what predators. Versus most people come the other way, right?
Yeah.
And so, and of course, Jerry's turned us on, and as of others, to the vibration idea. And I wonder if some of what you're describing with those other lures, the busy ones, might just be an unrealistic sound profile. Whereas that more subtle needlefish, might be part of this, just a little less, hey, eat me, and a little more, I'm nothing to see here.
Yeah. I mean, it's a debate where you could put 10 of us in a room
Mm-hmm.
and, there's going to be fists thrown by the end of the conversation. But not that a metal lip doesn't put off good vibrations, but
Yeah.
I don't think they put off natural vibrations.
Well done. Well done. Yeah.
And
Because it's a fact that sound travels further underwater. It's a fact that that's how striped bass, that's their primary sense, is feel of
yep,
vibration, right? And their eyesight only gets, quote, good at short range. They
right.
see profile shape from distance.
And I take that same sort of concept and I have no way to back it. Like
Neither.
until we can read a striper's mind,
Yeah.
it's all just my own concept and theory, but it's my belief that, I know guys listening to the podcast can't see, but it's my belief that a small needlefish or a small lure with a twitch puts off a similar profile to a big lure fished slowly with no twitches.
Hmm.
So if my eyes are closed and somebody throws these two things at me, I have no way of knowing whether it's a 5-inch lure or a 9-inch lure. And I don't believe the stripers can either. So if I'm pulling a 9-inch lure gently through the water, it puts off a little bit of a smaller profile. But if I have a small lure and I'm twitching it, it's putting off vibration, presenting bigger.
Mm-hmm.
So it can be one end of the spectrum to the other. You can present as a sand eel, a squid, a needlefish, a sea bass, a porgy, all with one lure.
Yeah.
Whereas, as much as I love fishing metal lips because they're fun, it only puts off big. You can't, not that I've figured out, I can't fish a needlefish or I can't fish a metal lip quietly.
Yeah.
So,
It's um, that's an interesting point about the different sizes and then what you do to it, which is why you might need 5 different needlefish. But the um, sort of the one of the other lures, it's a different. I'm thinking of guppy, but it's been a habit for a long time. But pencils in general, let's talk about those. What
yeah,
a great searching lure, and that's kind of my confident searching lure. And you must talk to a lot of people at shows about pencils. I know you have a couple.
yep.
What's that conversation like? What's the curiosity people have about pencils, or how do they make decisions on pencils?
Well, actually, it's great that you introduce pencils with that name because when people ask why I have 6 needlefish or 5 needlefish and I only have a couple of pencils, It's because I love Wayne and guppy lures.
Yeah, great job.
Why would I design 3 more pencils when I can just fish
Problem
guppy
solved. Yeah.
pencils, right? Like that's how a lot of us get into this business in the first place. Like I design a needlefish because I need it to fit a certain, hole in my bag.
See?
I don't need to design new pencils because somebody else did
No.
it for me.
Yeah.
So I do have 3 pencils. 2 of them go back to the Al Gags days, the C Special, which is a big flat bottom canal styles pencil popper. The Fish Stick, which is a small, easy to cast pencil popper that rides fairly high, and then the Mini C Special, which is somewhere in between the two.
Hmm.
Um, Again, I designed, or I shouldn't say designed. Jeff designed the Mini C Special. I just perfected it, but to me, that's really all I need
Hmm.
without the guppies. Guppy makes, what does Wayne make now? 10 different pencil poppers.
Yeah, I think so.
So, when he decides he's not making pencils anymore, I'll start making more pencils.
Sure. Well, it's interesting. You say something that I hear a lot from some of the best fly tires around. I'm thinking of Bob Pop of Explain Chocolate. You know, um, design solve problems. Start with a problem and solve for a problem. Because I mean, so many people. It probably it's madness in fly, but it's probably to a degree the same in plugs. Is there's a lot of redundancy, resolving of a problem that isn't there or no longer there. It's been addressed.
Right. I'm not,
And I
I'm
think
not
it's
trying to reinvent the wheel. I'm just trying
right.
to make sure I have all the tools I need.
And I think it's also one of the things that's getting gummed up with Instagram and everything else is everybody who wants this adoration or credit without a shout out to Wayne or a shout out to Bob Popovic, wherever the appropriate uh, Al Gags, right? Wherever the appropriate
Right.
recognition goes. So good on you there. I think that's the way it needs to be. We're better for
Well,
it. Our sport's better for it.
well, I mean, to be very humble and honest, I'm 44 years old. I was 7 when Al Gag started making needlefish.
Right.
I did not design or
Still older than
invent.
you.
I did not design or invent anything. Even the lures that I've designed, quote unquote, the little needlefish that I released a couple of years ago.
Mhm,
This is because John Habs is no longer making needlefish.
mhm,
So
mhm.
it's not a copy per se, but it's very similar style. I'm not an inventor.
Yeah.
I'm simply the guy making these now
Yep. Yep.
and perfecting when I can and tweaking when I can. But
What are talk about perfections and tweaks? What are some examples?
um, silly things like the eyes on the needlefish. Right between the eye sockets on a needlefish is a relatively thin piece of wood.
Mm-hmm.
So when I took over from Jeff, the eye socket was a little bit bigger and this was a weaker spot. So just a matter of figuring out, okay, what size eye can I do and make this spot a little bit stronger?
Mm-hmm.
Um, trying to design a new needlefish means drilling all kinds of different holes in the belly to figure out how much weight you're going to put, where you're going to put it. Um, you know, Silly things like split rings. I
Yeah.
couldn't get split rings from my previous vendor, so I switched over to Wolverine because they're great split rings and he ships as soon as I place an order with him.
Right.
So, new primers, new paints.
I
I
mean, a
try
good
not to
example
mess.
might be swapping out those hackles and bucktail on that rocket and going to a tail, to a
Yeah.
plastic. I
Yeah.
don't. I haven't seen another lure like that. Um, and was that when you got it from Al? It was feathers, and you took Al's tail basically because that's what it is. It's not a. Is it a gag's tail?
Um, so
Similar.
Al Gag himself switched over from the feathers to the soft plastics.
Got it.
He made that design change. So 24/7 Pocket Rocket was always with a soft plastic tail.
Mhm.
Um, I'm just continuing that. The one that I happened to show you, the one that I grabbed from the wall
Yep.
was a Zinger Baits.
Ah.
Um, Some of these are owl gags and some of them are zinger. They are very similar,
Yeah.
but they're not quite the same. Um, I don't pour any soft plastic. I've never poured any soft plastic, but Al Gag doesn't make all the colors that he used to. So I had to find
Oh,
somebody else to make custom colors for me.
sure.
Things like yellow and chartreuse that, Al Gag used to make. His tails are fantastic, but, I wanted to have a variety of
Right.
colors to offer. And Zinger Baits does a pretty nice job with making, any color I throw at him,
Yeah.
from
Great.
black and blue to black and silver
Yes.
to
There's
yellow.
another collaboration be inside of the plug lure building network.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, So the other style of lure I wanted to cover was the spook. Get some insights from you on where it might be fished. One of my very favorites of yours is the mully, and I think I'd like to again take a little bit of a tackle and tactics approach to a wooden spook. There's loads of plastic spooks out there, docks and everybody else, right? The mully, the one I'm thinking of, I think there's two of them. I know there's two of them, but the one I usually fish is what, about 6 or 7 inches, 6 inches.
Yep.
Yeah.
So in spooks, the flipping mullet goes back to the Al Gag days.
Yeah.
There were two sizes of this spook. This is the smaller of the two. It has a little bit more of a cone-shaped nose.
Right.
24/7 Jeff designed the mully that you're speaking of.
Right.
I think in 2012 or 2013. And I have no idea how long the dock has been around. I've never looked into it.
Yeah.
But, the mully is a tail-weighted spook. So when you let it just sit in the water, it bobs head up, tail down. Where I think the wooden spook like this shines is because of that. Because when you start retrieving it, you can make it splash and throw water almost like a pencil popper. But a plastic spook, and I own the dock and I own other spooks. I have nothing against them, but they kind of only do one thing.
Right.
Whereas the wooden spook, when it's tail weighted, you can make it glide, you can make it splash, you can just fish it like a pencil popper when you want to. I think it's just a little bit more versatile.
Mm-hmm.
But then we also have a smaller version, which we call the Mully Junior. This was another one that Jeff, my predecessor, had made in small batches. I just needed to figure out the specifics to start doing it on a regular basis.
Sure.
So I didn't design it. I just sort of perfected it and brought it into
Yeah.
full-time production.
Yeah. Well,
But
big fan of that mully. That's another one of my go-to searching patterns. And doesn't that kind of describe a searching pattern? You want some versatility. We
Right.
talked about the fast and slow. We talked about sound profile, and you can do different things with a handful of lures, which I've always been impressed. One of the things about the Saltwater Edge is, we serve, surf, fly, inshore, and jig bottom fishermen. And, you open up that plug bag of a really committed surf guy, and there's a handful of styles of lures. There's a smattering of color, maybe bright, bone, and blurple, right? And you open up some other boxes like the boat guy, and it's just because he's got a boat, he's got room, and
Right.
he's got so many colors and so many. His fly boxes look the same, and just full of stuff, right? But it seems like the surf caster has to curate it and has to think a little bit more and has to get more out of each lure, right?
Well, it's an analogy that you can take to fishermen, to tool guys. A mechanic can't have every possible tool, but we can own virtually everything, but you can't take everything with you.
Yeah.
So, you need to be a little bit specific on where am I going tonight? What kind of a spot is this? Is it going to be a big tide? Is it going to be a small tide? How bright's the moon? What colors do I want? And, I guess at its core, that's why I love fishing so much, because we don't know. We don't have the answer. And even if we have a good night, maybe a different lure would have had a better night. If I had a bad night, was it because the fish weren't there? Was it because I had the wrong lures? That's the beauty of fishing to me.
Were they right behind your plug the whole time? Yeah.
Yeah, and there's no way to ever know.
Right.
And that sort of drive, if I have a bad night, I want to go back out and try again.
Uh-huh.
If I have a good night, I want to go back out and do it again. If I catch a personal best, I want to see if I can catch a bigger one.
Yeah.
If I didn't catch anything, I got to go back and redeem myself. So having all these lures to choose from, it's it just gives us the ability to sort of get involved and make ourselves crazy and try
Yeah.
again.
Yeah. I'll butcher the quote, but I'll find it in the future because I think it's absolutely captures what you're trying to say. It was an older guy who was a tarpon fisherman, and he described fishing as multiple occasions for hope.
Yeah. Yep.
Right?
I know of the quote. Yes.
Yeah, you do. Yeah. Because I got the guy in my head, but I don't remember the detail of it. But I think that's pretty much describes the folks that would be listening to this podcast, and
I mean,
folks that decide to get in the fishing business in general.
it can be taken back to my childhood. I can picture the creek or the pond, and even if I'm just fishing with a night crawler, was I fishing in the wrong spot? Were the fish not biting at that time? Maybe I need to go over to that pool. Maybe I need to go under that tree. That's to me the beauty of fishing, where,
Mhm.
I'm not much of a sports guy because in my opinion, the Super Bowl's over. We know who won.
Yeah.
We can talk about calls and we can talk about plays all we want, but we know who won. Fishing, we never really know.
Yeah.
That's really what drives me in this passion is
That's awesome.
no matter what, I want to go more.
So let's fast forward to kids are off the bus, wife's home. You got a reasonable shot to get out on your own. What's a fishing trip? And a little bit of from the plug builder, my bag's empty. Here's what I'm going to bring perspective. You have an occasion to go, not a in-depth, 20-minute answer. Just curious how you might, look, I'm looking at the wall behind you. I'm like, you have to make some choices. So make some.
Well, my bag or my box, I spend a lot more time in the kayak these days than I do from the surf. The guy that I fish with most often also has a couple of kids. We have a rhythm where we pick the best 1 or 2 nights of the week in terms of weather. After the kids are all in bed, we go fishing.
Mhm.
But my kayak usually has 2 or 3 needlefish of all sizes, a couple of metal lips, a bunch of soft plastics like gravity tackle and out gags. I'm fishing almost exclusively at night, so it's pretty rare that I have more than one spook or one pencil. I'll throw them at night occasionally, but most of the time I'm throwing needlefish, soft plastics. I have a couple of metal lips like Big Fish Bait Company. Larry is one that I've just always gravitated to because he makes prettier plugs than I do. Um, and then it's a matter of, are we going to lean on eels tonight? I try not to lean on eels more than I have to, but especially when the fish are around, it's hard to turn them down.
Sure. Darter makes the cut.
Darter makes the cut. It's a tough thing for me because I don't make a darter.
Mhm.
So, it's usually a super strike darter or a
Sure.
401 darter, but, I don't have a darter that I love. So I think I probably have one in my bin right now, but it's a super
Yeah.
strike and, nothing against it, but
No, I got you. What are your thoughts on color?
you really want to get into this?
Yeah, man. I'm looking at that wall. Let's go.
Um, at the risk of offending, I don't think color matters very much. I fish the same color all the time, and it's whatever I screwed up a couple of weeks ago. If if I have a drip or a run or I chip the paint, like the copper color is something I fish a
Beautiful.
lot because I screw up this copper color a
Oh,
lot. I get a drip or I get a run or the blend wasn't quite right. Um, I've never had an outing for stripers where I thought color made the difference.
Yeah.
And again, we don't really know. Maybe a different color would have meant a better night. Maybe the color I happened to be fishing was what made the night, but I don't know. And I've never had I've never had a point where I thought I'm going to switch lures and it's going to make the difference. Or I
Yeah.
did switch and it made the difference. So I paint a ton of colors because everybody has their own belief. Um,
Definitely. Mhm.
if anything, I'll sort of piggyback on the concept that Jerry Audette, who we mentioned earlier, sort of pushes contrast, whether it's, a darker back over a lighter belly, which is about as natural counter shading as you're going to get, or, like the mully that I held up. If I'm throwing a spook, it's usually a very brightly colored spook,
Yeah.
whether it's a bright head or a different colored back or whatever it might be. Color, we could talk about this for 3 hours and I'd be
Oh,
happy
yeah.
to, but we're not going to fit it into this podcast.
Well, I think, the conversation we had earlier about the purpose of a needlefish, of a spook, of a pencil, of a soft plastic, and the subtlety and the hide in plain sight versus broadcast, hey, here I am. Those are choices, right? And let you create curiosity, because that's the purpose, right? Is to get them curious, to follow, to eat, ideally to eat, right? But it has to start, and you recognize that they feed opportunistically a lot, and then might dial in, which color might come up the priority list a little when they're a little bit more focused on. I'm thinking more like sand eels, or a
Right.
shape, more of a shape issue than a color issue, in fact. But when there's and this is I'm borrowing from the scientist from a couple weeks ago, and Aaron Adams there. When there's local abundance, it's easier for them to lock in versus when it's more random, they're selecting out. They're like, doesn't sound right, moving too fast. I don't know. I'm making this stuff up, but I mean that's the process of opportunistic, is to eat some things that aren't food, and eat some things that are. But you're taking what randomly swims by.
Right. And to me, it's a weird thing where when it's a needlefish, I generally try to present a more natural looking color because I
Mm-hmm.
think that's what the needlefish is doing, is presenting a natural profile. But when it's a spook or a pencil, I'm usually throwing a bright color, figuring, we're putting off a loud splashing profile. Well, I want to give them the chance to see it.
Yeah.
And when Jerry was doing a deep dive into the literature about what bass can and cannot see, he was sending me screenshots of the color spectrum. Like, oh, they can see blue and purple better at night, but they can see yellow, red, and orange during the day. And I might be butchering it, but that's what I remember anyway.
Yeah.
Um, and at the end of the day, if a guy like Dave Anderson is going to say that color matters, he's a way more experienced and successful fisherman than I. So I can't argue that point. I have to
Right.
take that into consideration. But do I believe it matters? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, you've got answers for everybody over your shoulder, either way.
Well,
Um,
exactly.
so let's move on to this the recent launch of the products. I think they're not new products; they're configured. Um, and why don't I let you? Well, I'll tee it up with the data as I understand it. I've been on the road with this singles program you see over my shoulder. We've done a couple of events. You were at one of them in Westerly. Been on the Cape. We're going to be up on the North Shore, probably the South Shore. And Mass DMF has done a study years ago, 30 years ago, that said post-release mortality of striped bass is about 9%. And right on the cover of that thing, it said, do not use for management. And we've been using it for management for 30 years, okay? So that's the number that people equate with post-release mortality of striped bass, a fish that doesn't survive the fight. And so Massachusetts wanted to better understand different tackle configurations. And it came back that bait, not surprisingly, is something over 20% because it's often ingested. And then treble was something like 7-8%. And single, which was less hooks, obviously, was something like 5-6%. But the best, and shame on me because I had it last night. I have a mully configured the way I like, um, and the best setup was a configuration of a single belly hook. Well, you've got them, a single belly hook with a flag on the back. So the belly hook could be a single or a treble, but the key is the flag on the back, and that took post-release mortality to less than 4%. So from 9 to less than 4. And it's a change anybody can make. And one of the things I've tried to do this winter with this road show and with the singles program is to make more people aware of this tackle choice. And then we've seen companies like you, Hoagie Lures, and I think a couple of others are starting to offer that configuration. So I think I covered the science part, but do you have any insights on, the kind of how it affects a lure and its swim, and you can really get into the weeds on that. I'm not asking for you to get into the weeds, but do you have any observations as someone who's handled a lot of plugs?
Well, it started when I first took over from Jeff. I wanted to rig the lure the way it's rigged now with an inline single.
Mm-hmm.
And because I use swivels on the belly, an inline single just isn't conducive to a swivel. And when I wanted to switch over the tails, at least to inline singles, I had two hurdles. Number one, I couldn't get inline singles in the quantity I needed. I couldn't find bulk supply. And I make too many lures to be going to, Cabela's and buying 25 packs of hooks.
Right.
But I had mentioned this to a couple of tackle shops that bought the lures, and I had two different tackle shops tell me, I'm not really sure that's a great choice. I think my customers want treble hooks. So combined with the bulk hook thing, I sort of put it on the back burner.
Mm-hmm.
But I pulled a needlefish out of my own bag. This is how I fish most of my needlefish, with nothing on the back at all.
Mm.
And at night, I just don't want two hooks. I think it swims the same. This hook actually needs to be replaced. It's pretty well bent out from last season, but this is how I fished it myself. So I wanted to be able to offer either an inline single or something else on the back, but let's be honest, this lure looks funny with nothing on the back. If this were on the wall at Saltwater Edge, it almost looks like I forgot something.
Yeah.
So the switch over a few years ago happened. It was kind of like 3 or 4 things piled on top at one time. Jerry Audette had told me he doesn't fish anything on the back. He's a big proponent of the one hook solution, I think he calls it, with Dave Anderson, where sometimes they put a little weight on the back.
Yeah, sash weight or
Yep.
Whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Dave actually wrote an article for us, and we incorporated the video that he and Jerry did a couple years ago, sort of outlining options. I'll put that in the show notes, but it's a very interesting take on what it could be.
Yeah, and Jerry and I had gone back and forth because one of the things that I've done in small batches to balance it out, and I don't know how well you'll be able to see, but the
Yep.
wire that a flag is tied on, I've taken this sometimes and wrapped lead wire around it like you would for a heavy fly,
Yeah.
and then glued that in place if I needed something that was a little bit heavier. But it is my belief that at least the needlefish I make don't require weight on the back. I think they fish just the same whether you've got nothing on the back at all or, essentially a weightless flag. I've got some hanging here above my workshop that have either Algag's tails or gravity tackle tails on the back end, and I really want to put out some commotion. But it came down to me saying, you know what? I'm just going to make this switch. And, I keep using his name, but Jerry, because Jerry was the one that I sort of looked to as an opinion to say, do you think I can do this? Do you think because if I talk to, with all due respect, I talk to you, you're a tackle shop owner. You only have the perspective of you and your business. Whereas a guy like Toby or Jerry or Dave or Al or Jeff, we sort of have a a once removed opinion of,
Totally.
you know,
I'm all ears to those guys that put that time in on the water. You know what I mean?
and so
I exponentially, or whatever the right math expression is, weight their opinion. Uh,
right.
I'll never, uh, we all make choices, right? And there's a lot of there's a lot that they learn in those that time in the surf, and they're good guys, generous, thoughtful. That's a good group of people for a sounding board. Another one, since you showed that flag, and this is the only way I'll probably get in the Saltwater Edge podcast because he's a freshwater guy. Rich Strolis ties those flags for you, right? He is a tremendous fly tyer. If anyone on this is interested in streamers and things like that for trout, you can't do much better than some of the designs of Rich Strolis. So,
Yeah, and he lives not too far from me.
yeah,
He is a legend in the fly tying community.
absolutely.
Trout and pike, and everything from tiny little winter caddis to 6-inch long streamers.
Yeah.
And I sort of stumbled onto Rich by dumb luck. I had bought some of his flies in the past,
Mm.
and I had reached out to him and said, I'm looking for someone to tie bucktail hooks and bucktail flags for me. I know this is not something you would do. Do you have anybody you'd recommend? And he wrote back to me like, "Oh, I would do it. It would be a nice
Yeah,
change of
exactly.
pace."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Are you, I was almost like, "Are you sure?" And I mean, he probably did. I'd have to ask him. He'd know better than me. He probably did 10,000 flags for me last year.
Oof.
I mean, between the bucktail flags, the needlefish flags, which are his design. It's a couple of hackle feathers wrapped with a craft fur collar.
Huh.
Um, but single hooks with feathers, treble hooks with bucktail, which the treble hooks I'm kind of phasing out. I don't use them. I sell them, but they sell slowly. But Rich has been awesome.
Yeah.
Um,
Great guy.
he
Wrote a great book, um, Catching Shadows.
catching shadows. Yep.
So, uh, yeah, one of my favorites. So I'm curious, you mentioned this heavy flag, that you put some, I imagine, lead or something on that shank, right? Do you cover it with, some kind of epoxy or something? There's wouldn't that rust or complicate the dissimilar metals or anything like that, or you don't, not a problem?
It was something that I had tinkered around with probably 3 or 4 years ago when I first started talking to Jerry one on one, where they toy around with the sash weights and the little worm weights,
Yeah,
and
worm weight. That was it.
I had said like, well, this is something I was doing just to try and balance out some of the lures, where I just wrap that I I I pull the hair back on a flag, I wrap it with a few turns of lead wire, and then I would UV resin it on there,
Okay.
just like you would a big, streamer head.
Yep. Yep.
Um, a Solarez sort of UV cure resin. And it
Yep.
it held on well enough. Um, I probably destroyed the flag before I ever needed to
Sure.
worry about, a 3-year life expectancy on the lead. But, conversations with guys like Jerry and sort of my own experience, it was like, this is kind of unnecessary. It's
Mhm.
it's doable, but it's not something that's,
Good to
I'm
know
not going to do
because
that on everyone.
I always think of the flag itself. Since we've been talking about this for over a year, we've always sold point Jude flags, replacement flags. Just didn't get the attention they're getting now. But they can be thin, which might be better on a smaller metal or epoxy, and they can be just bucktail. Or they could be that bucktail or craft fur hackle, with more drag, more profile. You know what I mean? So there's a small, medium, large, I think, or at least two sizes that's warranted. A bigger lure, bigger profile, that kind of thing. So let's change gears real quick. And I'll tell you this podcast is brought to you by the Saltwater Edge. Go to saltwateredge.com to check on the latest in surf, fly, light tackle, and jigging gear. We have hundreds of 5-star reviews for our same-day shipping, advocacy for our fisheries, and our passionate crew of anglers who are ready to answer your questions about tackle and tactics from bonefish to bluefin. Use the code 24/7 to get free shipping on your next order. So a couple wrap-up questions, Elliot. And I got to stop myself. We asked for podcast feedback, and 30, 40 people responded. And one of them was, Jenks talks over the guests. It's, if it isn't true, I am absolutely true. So this is going to be me doing my best job of shutting up and not answering for you, but I have an idea. One of the wrap-up questions we like to ask everybody are, what are 2 lures you'd recommend?
I mean, I'm a fan of needlefish. I said earlier, if you're not fishing either needlefish or darters, I think you're missing out on fish. It doesn't have to be one of my needlefish. It could be a Super Strike or a Larson, or there's Frank G. There's dozens of guys that make really serious quality needlefish. But I think if you're not fishing either a needlefish or a darter, I think you're missing out. And the soft plastics like a gravity tackle or an Algags or a Zinger. If you're telling me I have to choose 2 things to go to the water with, it's probably going to be a needlefish, probably a 9-inch needlefish because I think it's more versatile, and a 13-inch GT eel.
Yeah. And is that part of the glide and hide in plain sight logic?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have more success with that versatility, where sure, I've caught some really big fish on metal lips, and I've caught some really big fish on eels, but there are nights where, we're fishing eels and not catching fish, and then all of a sudden needlefish starts producing. I'll never know why. I can't say that it's the needlefish. I maybe it was just that cast, maybe it was just that time. I don't know. But I mean, I had a night last year where my buddy Derek and I were catching fish. We were doing well. We were fishing eels. I ran out of eels, and I switched over to a needlefish, and I caught the biggest fish of the night. So, yeah, it's all anecdotal, but it's fun. So,
and you could talk about it the whole way home.
And we usually do.
What are 2 resources you find helpful? So I heard you say, just for you at this point in your life, you look out the week ahead and find the 2 best weather days.
Yeah, I mean, I got to a point where if I can only fish 1 or 2 nights a week, I have to pick, it doesn't have to be the calmest night per se, but it's the one that looks the most appealing to me. So, the weather apps I'm on, but, when you say resources, that's a very open-ended question.
Yeah.
During the summertime, I'm on the weather app 17 times a day trying to figure out.
Which one?
I usually use Fish Weather, I think it's called. The windy and fish weather are the 2 that matter the most to me.
Windy. But people know that one, but I'll put it in the notes as well as the windy.
Yeah, windy I rely on just to double check the fish weather, but tide doesn't matter as much to me because with 2 kids at home, I sort of have to rely on what nights I can fish.
More to do with hockey practice or something, or dance lessons.
Well, they're a little small for that. My son will be 6 next week, so he's just getting into sports. So I'll have to worry about hockey and dance and the way these kids go, probably karate or jujitsu or something soon.
My pro tip would be I loved playing hockey, my favorite sport, but I got all my kids through a youth hockey program by like the time they were age 7. So they still thought hockey was a cold room where you go eat Skittles. You know what I mean? And I was not going to be the hockey dad that my dad was, right? So think about that,
Well, all winter long, my son has been asking me when we go fishing. When it's warm, can we go fishing? Yes, buddy. Like, you're at an age now where you can sit by the pond for a few hours. We will fish, till your heart is content. I promise.
That's great. How about 2 tips to improve? I imagine you get a lot of different people coming to your booth. Someone who knows exactly what they want, and someone who's asking questions or has expressed, a struggle. When you're from your perspective as a plug builder, what are 2 tips you think people could generally use to improve?
Um, I think fishing as much as humanly possible
Mm-hmm.
and trying different things is probably the best thing I ever did. Before the kids were born, I was very fortunate where my wife didn't really care how often I fished. So I was getting out there to the same spot sometimes 3, 4 nights a week
Yeah.
and seeing how that spot fished under a new moon, under an overcast sky, sometimes right after a storm.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to fish the same spot and really learn a spot inside and out was a big thing for me. But now that I'm stuck in the workshop, I love listening to podcasts and hearing other opinions and saying, I never thought about that. I should try that. So
Be curious.
yeah, just
Yeah.
trying other things. I could give one of everything I make to a certain buddy of mine, and he would still fish the SP minnow.
Yeah.
So just experimenting a little bit, even myself, trying other lures from other makers and not relying on my own stuff all that often, it has been successful for me too.
Yeah. If you made less mistakes, blems and drips and all that, you could fish other people's stuff.
I'm definitely getting better at it over the past 8 years. I had a lot more blems
Well,
8 years ago.
I know it's you have a high quality standard, so that's why your bag might have a few more lures in it than some other guys. So good for you.
Well, I have quality standards, but the sort of mantra I learned from Jeff was if you're in the paint booth and you have a blem, just run with it. If you're at the workbench and you're rigging them and you're getting ready to pack it, if you see the same blem a couple of times, okay, then maybe it's a real blem.
Mm-hmm.
But I can look at any lure and I can find something.
Ah,
My wife is the director of quality. She's been in quality her entire career. So she's looking over my shoulder going, I don't like that dent. I don't like that scratch. And I'm like, it's fine. Would you just let me package the lure, please?
yeah, yeah. Is that what she pitches in on packaging?
Helps with
Very nice.
packaging, inventory. She does a lot of the shipping of website orders at night after the kids go to bed. And she does almost all the bookkeeping, the computer work. So
Excellent.
yeah, she doesn't do any painting or rigging, but she helps out quite a bit.
Teamwork. Love it. So this is your chance to tell us where people can learn more about 24/7 and that kind of thing. Why don't you let it rip on? We'll put all this in the show notes too, so people can refer to that. But I like to give the guests an opportunity to tell people where they can learn more.
Well, I mean, my website is 247lures.com. It's built and grown over the past 5 years, but I have this inventory is ready to ship. Guys like Peter at Saltwater Edge have been stocking the lures for years now.
Yep.
So I have 25 tackle shops where you can go and see a variety of different lures, but Instagram, 24/7 lures, Facebook. I try to stay off social media, but it's a necessary evil.
Yeah.
So, I'm at the shows too. I'll be in Jersey this weekend for the Jersey Surfcaster show. Providence in a few weeks. I'll be right near you. I think the next aisle over.
Yeah.
And then Edison, New Jersey in the week after that. So.
And the other thing I would note about your website, because I took a cruise, was the tackle parts, the lips.
Yeah.
For lure building. We had a guy in here yesterday who was looking for beads, blades, and squid bodies to build fluke rigs. And I'm like, damn, and it's just because we had a tremendous fly tying section, but and a lot of people come to us buying bucktails and flash to turn. Well, hell, you're bucktails now, right? We started working together on that one, you and me. Yeah,
bucktails.
Yeah, beauteous. And whether you're tying bucktails or flies or whatever, and this whole lure building crafting piece is growing. I think that's my observation.
Yeah, I mean, mine sort of started out of necessity. I couldn't get the quantity of components that I needed from the normal suppliers. And so wires, the through wire for the lures, I had to find a company that just did wires.
Mm-hmm.
And when you end up with what might be a 6-year supply of wires, I said, well, maybe I can sell these to other lure builders.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden it was grommets and belly weights and split rings. And for the most part, my component selection is just stuff that I use myself.
Right.
It's the wires, the grommets, the eyes that I use myself. But other guys have asked for, metal lips, the
Right.
bucktails, and it's expanded from there. So I'm definitely not a one-stop shop, but I mean, right next to me outside of the camera here is a 5-foot tall cabinet, and it's just components.
Yeah.
It's 20 different kinds of metal lips and I don't know, 6,000 wires and 5 different sizes of split rings. So,
Mm.
it sort of happened out of necessity, but I like to help other lure builders any way I can. So
Sure. Yeah.
here we are.
It's a passion for sure, and you followed yours and teamed up with your wife. It's great, and really happy to have your product in here. It does very well for us, and we'll see you, I guess, in a couple of weeks. And do thank you again for your effort to configure lures to help with that post-release mortality striped bass. I think that that we certainly all recognize the situation's not good, so any step you can take to have less of an impact is probably wise.
Yeah,
Elliot,
I mean,
thanks a bunch.
I really appreciate you having me on. I'm honored to be part of the podcast.
You betcha. Well, you'll get to listen to yourself sometime down in the basement.
I probably won't be listening to myself. I enjoy listening to other people talk.
Take it easy, man.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
very much, sir.
Of course. Bye-bye.